Tonight, we are going to peel back the layers of gold leaf and limestone that shroud the most secretive aspect of human history. We are venturing away from the bright, sun-scorched exterior of the pyramids and descending into the cool, incense-heavy air of the pharaoh's private chambers. This is not the history you were taught in school, nor is it the sanitized version often presented in museums. We are about to explore the intimate, often shocking and profoundly spiritual sexual practices of ancient Egypt's rulers. When we think of the pharaohs, we imagine stoic statues and unmoving stone faces, but the reality behind the palace walls was a world of intense pressure, where the private act of procreation was a matter of national security, cosmic balance, and divine duty. In a land where the flooding of the Nile meant the difference between life and starvation, the virility of the king was not just a personal matter, it was the engine that kept the universe from collapsing into chaos. From marriages between brothers and sisters to the dark political intrigues of the harem, and from the use of bizarre medical aphrodisiacs to the belief that sexual potency continued even after death, we are about to uncover the strange and fascinating reality of life as a living god. Imagine the flickering light of oil lamps casting long shadows against walls covered in hieroglyphs. The air is thick with the scent of myrrh and blue lotus, a flower known for its mild narcotic and euphoric effects, often used to set the mood for royal intimacy. You are standing at the precipice of a world where the lines between the family unit and the divine pantheon were completely erased. To understand the sexual lives of the pharaohs, you must first abandon modern concepts of morality and taboo. In this ancient civilization, the king was a direct descendant of the creator gods, a being of pure, divine blood. To mix this blood with that of a commoner or even a noble of lesser standing was often seen as a dilution of cosmic power. This belief system led to a practice that shocks us today, but was viewed as a sacred necessity then: royal incest. This wasn't a scandalous secret hidden away in the dark. It was a celebrated theological imperative. Just as the gods Osiris and Isis were brother and sister, yet husband and wife, the pharaoh often married his own sister, half-sister, or in some debated cases his own daughters, to keep the solar bloodline purely concentrated. It was a high-stakes genetic gamble played for the sake of maintaining the divine right to rule, a practice that reinforced their separation from the ordinary mortals they governed. The pressure on these royal couples was unimaginable. Every union was a ritual, every attempt at conception a roll of the dice for the kingdom's future. The pharaoh's bedroom was essentially a microcosm of the universe. If he was potent and fertile, the Nile would flood, the crops would grow, and Mot, the concept of cosmic order, would be maintained. If he failed, chaos, famine, and destruction could follow. This anxiety permeated the royal courts, leading to the creation of vast support systems designed to ensure the king's reproductive success. This brings us to the Great House, often mistranslated or misunderstood by Western historians as a mere harem. We must strip away the Victorian or Orientalist fantasies of a pleasure dome filled with idle women waiting for the king's attention. The Egyptian harem, or the House of the Secluded, was a sprawling, complex institution. It was a city within a city, a bustling economic and political hub with its own administration, lands, workshops, and hierarchy. It was a place where hundreds, sometimes thousands of women, wives, concubines, foreign princesses, and their children lived and maneuvered for power. Within the walls of these harem palaces, the air crackled with ambition and danger. While the pharaoh's great royal wife held the supreme position, acting as the female counterpart to his divine power, the secondary wives and concubines were not powerless. They were often women of high birth, daughters of nobles or diplomatic brides sent from foreign empires like Babylon or Mitanni to cement treaties. These women brought their own cultures, languages, and political agendas into the heart of the Egyptian court. The harem was a place where a whisper could destroy a dynasty and where sex was often weaponized. The most chilling example of this is the famous Harem Conspiracy against Ramses III. This wasn't a rumor,
It was a cold, calculated coup attempt launched from within the king's own household. Ta, a secondary wife, plotted to assassinate the pharaoh to place her son Pentuer on the throne. The conspiracy involved magic, poison, and the corruption of high-ranking officials and harem guards. It reveals that the pharaoh's intimate life was a battlefield, where the struggle for succession turned the bedroom into a zone of potential lethal treachery. The judicial papyrus that records the trial of these conspirators gives us a grim look at the consequences of such betrayal, noting that Pentuer was forced to take his own life, a tragic end to a mother's ruthless ambition.
But the pharaoh did not rely solely on politics or natural ability to fulfill his duties. The ancient Egyptians were masters of merging the magical with the medicinal. When we look at their approach to sexual health, we find a fascinating and sometimes bizarre mixture of early science and ritual magic. The medical papyri from this era reveal that royal physicians were deeply concerned with male potency and female fertility. They concocted remedies that would make modern medicine recoil. Imagine a prescription for fertility that involved a paste made of dates, beer, and goose fat, meant to be used internally by the queen. Or consider the remedies for impotence that involved specific herbs mixed with honey and animal parts, believed to transfer the vigor of the animal to the king. These weren't quack cures sold in back alleys. They were the cutting-edge science of the day, administered by the most respected priests and doctors in the land. They viewed the body as a vessel for divine energy, and if that vessel needed physical repair or magical reinforcement, they would use every tool at their disposal, from pharmacology to prayer. Beyond the physical remedies, the Egyptians turned to the power of symbolism and talismans. The world of the pharaoh was populated by animals and deities that represented raw, unchecked sexual energy. The god Min, often depicted with an erect phallus and a flail, was the patron of male potency. Pharaohs would participate in harvest festivals dedicated to men, rituals that symbolically linked the king's ejaculation or sexual power to the fertility of the soil. It creates a vivid image, the most powerful man on earth publicly tying his own reproductive ability to the survival of his people. This connection was so strong that the pharaoh was often called the bull of his mother, a title that sounds strange to us, but conveyed his role as the self-regenerating source of life, strong and virile like a bull. This animal symbolism extended into the bedroom itself. Amulets in the shape of frogs, hedgehogs, and scarab beetles were common, worn or placed in the chamber to invoke protection and fertility. The scarab, rolling its ball of dung, symbolized the sun god Khepri rolling the sun across the sky, a metaphor for spontaneous creation and rebirth. By surrounding themselves with these symbols, the royals were creating a magical barrier against sterility and impotence. We must also consider the role of love and romance in this high-stakes environment. Despite the arranged marriages and political alliances, the Egyptians were a people who felt passion deeply. We know this because they left behind an incredible legacy of love poetry. These poems, found on scraps of pottery and papyrus, give voice to the universal human experience of longing and desire. They speak of sickness when the beloved is away, of the intoxicating sight of a lover, and of the thrill of secret meetings. They describe lovers as gazelles or lotus flowers, using sensual imagery that humanizes these ancient figures. It suggests that behind the formal statues and the stiff ceremonial art, the pharaohs and their queens experienced the same flush of attraction, the same jealousy, and the same heartbreak as anyone else. Even Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh who upended centuries of religious tradition, allowed himself to be depicted in moments of shocking intimacy with his wife Nefertiti. Art from the Amarna period shows them kissing, holding hands, and playing with their daughters under the rays of the sun disk Aten. This was a radical departure from the distant, godlike imagery of the past, offering us a window into a royal family that, for a brief moment, prioritized the display of affection over the display of power. However, the shadow of genetics often loomed over these romantic and dynastic ambitions. The practice of close kin marriage, while theologically sound to them, had devastating biological consequences. The most poignant example is the boy king Tutankhamun. Far from the golden, perfect youth of his death mask,
Forensic analysis of his mummy reveals a frail young man plagued by a club foot, malaria, and likely a host of other genetic disorders resulting from generations of inbreeding. His tomb, filled with treasures, also held a heartbreaking secret: the tiny mummies of two stillborn daughters. This discovery transforms our understanding of his short life. It shows us a young couple, Tutankhamun and his half-sister Akhenaten, desperately trying to fulfill their duty to produce an heir, only to be thwarted by the very bloodline they were trying to protect. It adds a layer of tragic humanity to the golden splendor of his burial, reminding us that being a living god offered no protection against the heartbreak of losing a child.
In stark contrast to the tragedy of Tutankhamun stands the monumental figure of Ramses the Great. If ever a pharaoh embodied the Egyptian ideal of virility, it was Ramses II. Ruling for over 6 decades, he turned fatherhood into a form of propaganda. He's believed to have fathered over 100 children, a feat that he proudly displayed on temple walls, listing his sons and daughters in long processions. For Ramses, his massive family was a testament to his divine favor. It was a message to his enemies and his subjects alike. My vitality is endless. My dynasty is secure. He married for love, as seen with his cherished Queen Neferkari, whose tomb is one of the most beautiful in Egypt. But he also married for strategy. He took Hittite princesses and Babylonian noblewomen into his harem, turning former enemies into in-laws and using his marriage bed as a diplomatic negotiating table. This ability to merge the personal with the political, to use intimacy as a tool of statecraft, was a hallmark of the most successful pharaohs. But what about the women? Were they mere pawns in these dynastic games? The evidence suggests otherwise. The queens of Egypt, particularly in the New Kingdom, wielded immense influence. Women like Tiye, the mother of Akhenaten, corresponded directly with foreign kings. Hatshepsut shattered the glass ceiling entirely, declaring herself pharaoh and ruling as a man, complete with a false beard, proving that the divine spirit of kingship was not strictly bound by biological sex. And then, of course, there is the last and most famous of them all, Cleopatra. Often reduced in popular culture to a seductress who used her beauty to entrap men, the historical Cleopatra was a woman of towering intellect. She spoke multiple languages, understood economics, and was a shrewd naval commander. Her relationships with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony were not the whims of a love-struck girl. They were calculated alliances designed to save her kingdom from the encroaching power of Rome. She used her charisma and her sexuality as geopolitical assets, engaging in a high-stakes Game of Thrones where the survival of an entire civilization rested on her ability to forge a bond with the most powerful men in the world. She represents the culmination of the Egyptian tradition where the personal and the political were fused. We must also venture into the more ambiguous territories of Egyptian sexuality. Did same-sex relationships exist within the court? The ancient Egyptians did not have the same rigid categories of sexual orientation that we have today. Their concern was less about gender and more about active and passive roles, and ultimately about whether an act contributed to chaos or order. There is the famous tomb of Niankhnum and Khnum-Hotep, two male royal manicurists who were buried together and depicted in an intimate embrace, noses touching, usually reserved for husbands and wives. While scholars debate whether they were brothers or lovers, the artwork suggests a deep, sanctioned bond that transcended the standard family model. It hints at a society that perhaps had space for forms of love that didn't fit the strictly procreative mold, provided they didn't disrupt the social fabric. Finally, we must look to the end of the journey, the afterlife. For the pharaoh, death was not the cessation of his vitality, but a transformation. The tomb was not just a resting place, it was a machine for resurrection. The funerary texts and art are filled with sexual symbolism, because for the Egyptians, creation and resurrection were two sides of the same coin. The god Osiris, dismembered and dead, was magically reassembled by Isis and impregnated her to conceive Horus. This myth was the template for the pharaoh's own rebirth. He had to be remembered, his potency restored, so he could be reborn into the field of reeds. This is why we see explicit imagery in the tombs, why the god Min is present, and why the mummy itself was prepared with such care. The erect phallus found on some mummies
or depicted in connection with Osiris, was not pornography, it was a theological statement. It declared, "Death has not conquered me. I still possess the power to create life." It was the ultimate defiance against oblivion. As we step back from this journey through the private world of the pharaohs, we are left with a picture of a civilization that was deeply, unapologetically obsessed with life. Every ritual, every marriage, every harem intrigue, and every tomb painting was driven by a singular, desperate need to ensure that life continued. They built monuments of stone to last forever, but they understood that true immortality lay in the bloodline, in the harvest, and in the cycle of rebirth. The pharaohs lived under the crushing weight of being the linchpin of this cycle. Their bodies were public property, their bedrooms were council chambers, and their most intimate moments were matters of cosmic significance. By understanding their sexual practices, the incest, the harems, the magic, and the politics, we stop seeing them as remote golden masks in a glass case. We start to see them as men and women navigating a world of immense power and fragility, trying to bargain with the gods using the most fundamental power they possessed, the power of creation. This is the true secret history of Egypt, written not just in stone, but in the complex, messy, and fascinating lives of its rulers.